The deep space signal carried a desperate tone even through the translator. Rael Theorin sat motionless in his command chair, his slender blue fingers intertwined as he replayed the message for the 5th time. The holographic display buzzed with static, a visual reminder of how the transmission had fought its way through the twisted reality of Krezinar's gray zone. "This is Science Station Helios, requesting immediate evacuation. Veltrax contamination at 70%. 13 personnel still alive. Dimensional stability failing. We cannot." The message dissolved into unintelligible noise before a final, clear phrase. "Please. Anyone." Rael's large, reflective eyes, characteristic of his Zalari physiology, narrowed as he surveyed the faces of his crew. All 7 of them, representing 5 different species, wore the same expression: dread. "The Council's directives are clear," he said, his voice measured and diplomatic as befitted his rank. "We retrieve the research data first, personnel second. We've been authorized to deploy automated drones. Senior Science Officer Tyvus, a Meridian with crystalline skin that reflected the command center's lights, looked up from her console. "Lieutenant Theorin, with respect, no drone has ever returned from Veltrax's contaminated space. The reality-warping properties overwhelm their navigation systems." "I'm aware, Officer Tyvus." Rael's antennae twitched slightly, the only outward sign of his frustration. "But we've been specifically instructed not to risk organic life. Those scientists knew the dangers when they established their research station. So we just leave them to die." Jax, the Vordak weapons specialist, growled. His voice came from somewhere deep within his armored exoskeleton. "We follow orders," said a cold voice from the shadows at the rear of the bridge. Lazarin Volk stepped forward, his humanoid form nearly indistinguishable from true humans, except for the metallic sheen of his skin. As a former Council enforcement agent, he technically had no rank on this mission, yet somehow possessed the highest authority. "The risk assessment is clear. This is, by definition, a suicide mission." The term hung in the air. Suicide mission. It had become the unofficial designation for any venture into Veltrax territory. The parasite entity, if that crude term could even apply to something that existed partially outside normal spacetime, had appeared without warning 3 years ago. It consumed technology, warped physical laws, and left nothing but twisted metal and organic matter behind. For a moment, silence pervaded the bridge. "We've sent the distress call to all nearby sectors," the communications officer finally said. "Standard protocol, but no one will come," Rael finished. "I know." The sharp beep of an incoming transmission cut through the gloom. The communications officer's head tentacles rippled in surprise. "Lieutenant, we have a response." Rael straightened. "From whom? The Council?" "No, sir." The officer's voice carried unmistakable confusion. It's from an Earth vessel." The bridge erupted in murmurs. Earth, humans, the outcasts of galactic society. Rael felt his dermis flush with sudden heat, a physiological response to unexpected stress. "Put it through," he ordered. The holographic display flickered and revealed a human female. Rael recognized the species immediately from his xenology studies, though he had never actually met one. Short, dark hair framed a weathered face, marked with what appeared to be burn scars along the left temple. She wore a faded uniform with insignia Rael didn't recognize. "This is Captain Amara Voss of the independent vessel, Tempest's Grin," she said without preamble. "We received your distress call and are approximately 16 hours from your position. We have experience with Veltrax contamination and are prepared to assist with evacuation." Rael found himself momentarily speechless. Humans had withdrawn, or more accurately, been encouraged to withdraw from the Galactic Council over 70 years ago. Their unpredictable nature, emotional decision-making, and tendency toward violence had made them incompatible with the careful balance of galactic governance. Most species now only encountered them through historical records or as cautionary examples in diplomatic training. "Captain Voss," Rail finally managed, "I appreciate your offer, but I must inform you that this is a Council-authorized mission. We are not permitted to accept assistance from non-aligned vessels, especially in such a high-risk scenario." The human's expression didn't change, but Rail noticed a slight narrowing of her eyes. "Lieutenant, it is Lieutenant, isn't it? I recognize the uniform markings, I understand protocol, but I also understand Veltrax. My crew has encountered it before. We've developed techniques that might help." Lazarin stepped forward. "That's quite impossible. Human ships lack the necessary shielding technology to survive Veltrax exposure. The Council would have record of any successful countermeasures." Something like amusement flickered across the human's face. "The Council doesn't know everything anymore, does it? Not since the fracture." The fracture. The polite term for the collapse of central galactic governance 50 years ago. What remained of the Council was a shadow of its former self, struggling to maintain order among species that increasingly looked to their own interests first. "We'll be at the edge of the gray zone in 16 hours. Captain Voss continued. "Accept our help or don't. We're coming anyway. Those scientists have less than 40 hours before total contamination. Your drones won't make it in time." She leaned closer to the transmission device. "And, Lieutenant, we're not doing this for the Council. We're doing it because there are people who need help." Voss out. The transmission cut, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Jax was the first to speak. "Well, that was very human." "Indeed," Rail responded, his diplomatic training automatically engaging to mask his turmoil. "Officer Tavas, verify their vessel specifications if possible. Communications, inform Council Command of this development." "And what will we do when they arrive?" Lazarin asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer the Council would give. Rail looked at the star map showing the pulsing red dot of the science station, surrounded by the sickly gray aura that indicated Veltrax contamination. "We follow orders," he said, echoing Lazarin's earlier words. But even as he spoke, something uncomfortable settled in his thoracic cavity, an emotion his species rarely experienced: doubt. 16 hours later. Rael stood at the observation deck, watching as the human vessel emerged from lightspeed. He had expected something sleek and dangerous. The few human ships he'd seen in historical records had aggressive, predatory designs. Instead, the Tempest's grin looked old, battle-scarred. Its hull plating showed evidence of multiple repairs, mismatched in places, with carbon scoring along its port side. It was larger than he'd expected, roughly twice the size of his own vessel, with unusual modifications protruding from its hull. "That ship has seen combat," Jax observed, having joined Rail at the viewport. "Serious combat." "Against Veltrax," Rail wondered aloud. "Against something," Jax replied. "Notice the manual patches on the forward section? Those weren't done at a shipyard. They were field repairs." The communications panel chimed. "Captain Voss is requesting permission to dock. Lieutenant." Rail hesitated. The Council's response had been predictably negative. No collaboration with humans. Maintain mission parameters. But something in him couldn't simply turn away potential help, not when 13 lives hung in the balance. "Granted," he said. "Security protocols in effect. Escort team to docking bay 3. Lazarin emerged from the shadows once more. I must formally object to this decision. Lieutenant, humans are unpredictable and dangerous. The Council specifically— I've noted your objection, Agent Vok. Rael interrupted, surprising himself with his firmness. But as mission commander, I'm exercising discretionary authority under Regulation 47B, in circumstances where additional resources may significantly increase mission success probability. Temporary collaboration with non-aligned entities may be authorized. Lazarin's metallic features hardened. Very well, I will accompany the escort team. As will I, Rael said, turning toward the lift. He couldn't explain the impulse driving him to meet these humans face to face. Perhaps it was simple curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, a feeling that the standard protocols were insufficient for the task ahead. The docking bay hummed with tension as the airlock cycled. Rael stood with his security team, watching as the heavy doors slid open to reveal Captain Amara Voss in person. She was taller than she had appeared on the transmission, with the solid build common to humans from high-gravity worlds. Behind her stood 4 other crew members, all human, all wearing the same mismatched uniform style, all bearing visible scars or augmentations. Lieutenant Theorin, Voss said, stepping forward with an outstretched hand. Rael hesitated, then remembered the human custom of physical contact as greeting. He extended his 3-fingered hand, feeling the strange warmth of human skin as they briefly clasped palms. Captain Voss, welcome aboard the Celestial Envoy. This is Agent Lazarin Vok, Council Observer, and my senior staff. He gestured to the assembled officers. Voss nodded to each in turn, then introduced her own crew. My XO, Commander Eli Reeves, Chief Engineer Juno Kai, Security Officer Marcus Drayson, and Dr. Isabel Sato, our xenobiologist and Veltrax specialist. Rael's attention caught on the last individual, a small, delicate-looking human female with lines of silver circuitry visible beneath her skin along her temples. She carried herself with an unusual stillness that contrasted with the casual posture of her shipmates. Dr. Sato, Rael acknowledged, you've studied the Veltrax phenomenon. Studied it, survived it, and learned how to navigate it. She replied, her voice unexpectedly melodic. My augments allow me to perceive the reality distortions it creates. Lazarin stepped forward. Impossible. The Veltrax defies conventional analysis. The greatest minds of the Council have failed to develop any reliable countermeasures. Dr. Sato smiled thinly. The Council approaches Veltrax as a scientific anomaly to be catalogued. We approach it as an enemy to be defeated. And have you defeated it? Rael asked, genuinely curious. Captain Voss answered instead. No one defeats Veltrax completely, but we've rescued 17 people from contaminated zones and retrieved data from 3 overtaken stations. We've learned to navigate the distortions, to predict its patterns. She pulled up her sleeve, revealing a forearm covered in circuitry similar to Dr. Sato's. And we've paid the price for that knowledge. Rael noticed his security team shifting uncomfortably. Voluntary cybernetic augmentation was rare among Council species, seen as an unnecessary risk and a relic of less enlightened times. Perhaps we should discuss strategy, Rael suggested, gesturing toward the briefing room. The science station's last transmission indicated they have less than 24 hours remaining. Less than that, Dr. Sato corrected. Veltrax acceleration follows a logarithmic curve in the final stages. If they were at 70% contamination when they sent that message, they'll reach 95% in approximately 22 hours. The briefing room fell silent as the Tempest's Grin's engineer, Juno Kai, finished explaining their proposed approach. The holo display showed a swirling visualization of the gray zone, with a jagged path cutting through it toward the science station. "You want to fly directly into the highest contamination area?" Taevas asked, her crystalline features refracting light in patterns that indicated extreme stress. "That's precisely where the reality distortions are strongest." Kai nodded, her fingers manipulating the hologram to zoom in on a particular section. "Counterintuitive, I know. But Veltrax creates what we call wake patterns, areas where reality has already been processed and temporarily stabilized. If we follow these patterns precisely, we can move faster than if we try to skirt the edges." "Like sailing in the wake of a larger ship," Rael mused, recalling an ancient nautical concept from his cultural studies. "Exactly." Kai's face lit up with surprise and approval. "Most non-humans don't grasp the metaphor." "Yo. But this approach still leaves us vulnerable to direct contact with Veltrax matter," Lazarin pointed out, his voice clinical. "The Council's simulations indicate a 97% failure rate for any organic vessel attempting such proximity." Captain Voss leaned forward. "With respect, Agent Vok, your simulations don't account for our modifications. The Tempest's Grin has a reinforced reality anchor, a combination of quantum stabilizers and what you might call intuitive navigation." "Meaning?" Rael prompted. Dr. Sato touched her temple augmentations. "Meaning we can feel the shifts before they happen and adjust course accordingly. Conventional instruments fail in Veltrax fields because they rely on consistent physical laws. We've learned to navigate by instinct as much as by instrumentation." Rael exchanged glances with his officers. What the humans described sounded dangerously like mysticism, precisely the kind of emotional, non-rational approach that had contributed to humanity's exclusion from the Council. "And if your feelings are wrong?" Lazarin asked, making no attempt to hide his skepticism. "Endo. Then we die," Commander Reeves said bluntly, speaking for the first time. "Just like those scientists will if we do nothing." Rael studied the tactical display again. His own mission plan involved launching a series of specialized drones, each programmed to follow slightly different approach vectors in hopes that at least one might reach the station. It was methodical, cautious, and, he had to admit, unlikely to succeed in time to save lives. "Your ship has these reality anchors," he said slowly. "Ours does not." Captain Voss nodded. "That's why we should take point. Your vessel can follow in our wake, literally. We'll create a path of stabilized space behind us." "And if you fail?" Taevas asked. "Yeah. Then you'll still have your drones as backup." Voss replied. "You lose nothing by letting us try." Rael felt the weight of the decision pressing upon him. Every rational analysis suggested maintaining distance and following Council protocols. Yet, something in the human's confidence gave him pause. They spoke of Veltrax not with the detached analysis of scientists studying a phenomenon, but with the determined focus of warriors who knew their enemy. "Lieutenant," Lazarin said quietly, "may I remind you that Council Directive 87C specifically prohibits joint operations with non-aligned species in Category 1 hazard zones." "I'm aware of the directive, Agent Vok," Rael replied, keeping his voice steady. "I'm also aware that 13 lives depend on our decision." He turned to Captain Voss. "We'll follow your lead, Captain, but I insist that a member of my crew joins yours to observe your methods firsthand, and I volunteer for that position." Surprise rippled through both groups. Zalari were not known for risk-taking. Rael himself had built his career on careful, diplomatic approaches to interspecies challenges. Voss studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Accepted. But Lieutenant, understand something. On my ship, we move fast and make decisions faster. There won't always be time for consultation or careful analysis. I understand, Rail said, though in truth he wasn't sure he did. He was about to step into an environment governed by human instinct rather than council protocol, precisely the situation his training had taught him to avoid. Yet, as he looked at the tactical display showing the fading life signs of the 13 scientists, he knew there was no other choice. Sometimes, survival required embracing the unconventional, even the dangerous. We depart in 2 hours, Voss announced. Packlight, Lieutenant. Where we're going. Extra baggage only weighs you down. The Tempest's grin looked even more battle-worn from the inside. As Rail followed Captain Voss through the main corridor, he noted the peculiar combination of advanced technology and improvised repairs. Exposed conduits ran alongside sleek control panels. Handwritten notes were affixed to various sections with adhesive strips. And everywhere, subtle modifications that seemed to serve no obvious purpose. Crystals embedded in junction boxes, unusual geometric patterns etched into door frames. Your ship is unique, he observed diplomatically. Voss glanced back with a hint of a smile. She's ugly but effective. Every modification has a purpose. Lieutenant, the crystals are quantum synchronizers. They help maintain normal space-time inside the hull. The etchings are calibrated disruption patterns. They create microfields that repel Veltrax particles. They entered the bridge, a circular chamber significantly more chaotic than the ordered environment of Rail's vessel. Crew members moved with practiced efficiency, but their interactions lacked the formal structure he was accustomed to. They called to each other by name rather than rank, argued openly about technical details, and even engaged in what appeared to be humor during critical pre-mission preparations. Take position at the auxiliary science station, Voss instructed, pointing to a console near the center of the bridge. You'll have full sensor access there, but I need to be clear. During critical maneuvers, we operate on my commands only. Questions are welcome in calm space, not in the gray zone. Rail nodded, taking his seat and familiarizing himself with the unfamiliar controls. The interface was oddly intuitive despite its non-standard design. He noticed Dr. Sato settling into a specialized station nearby, connecting her neural augments directly to the ship's systems through fine silver cables. Pre-flight checks complete, announced Commander Reeves from the pilot station. Reality anchor at 100%. Wake pattern analyzers online. Engineering reports all systems green, came Juno Kai's voice over the comm system. Quantum stabilizers primed and ready. Captain Voss took her command chair, activating a series of holographic displays. Lieutenant Theorin, please inform your vessel that we're initiating departure. They should maintain exactly 400 meters behind us at all times. Too close, and fluctuations from our engines might affect them. Too far, and they'll lose the benefit of our wake. Rail transmitted the instructions to the Celestial Envoy, where Tyvas had assumed temporary command. As he watched the view screen, the stars began to shift as the Tempest's grin moved away from his ship and toward the ominous gray boundary that marked the edge of Veltrax territory. All hands, secure for reality transition, Voss announced. Dr. Sato, active perception mode. Sato closed her eyes, her body tensing as the neural links pulsed with light. I have the patterns. Captain, initial boundary shows typical fluctuation. Identifying wake path now. Rail felt a sudden wave of disorientation as the ship crossed into the gray zone. The view screen image warped, stars stretching and compressing in impossible ways. His inner equilibrium organs struggled to compensate, and he gripped the edges of his console. First-time transition sickness is normal, Commander Reeves said without looking back. Focus on something solid and breathe slowly. Bearing 147 Pueri by 82.9 relative. Sato called out, her voice taking on an odd, distant quality. Wake pattern forming at 32 kilometers. Narrow but stable. Acknowledged, taking us in. Reeves responded, his hands moving across the control surfaces with remarkable speed. Rail forced himself to watch the sensor readings, despite his discomfort. What he saw defied conventional physics. Space itself seemed to fold and unfold around them, distances stretching and compressing without pattern. Yet somehow, the humans navigated through it with confidence, making minute course corrections based on Dr. Sato's quiet, continuous guidance. Your ship is following correctly, Voss informed him. They're maintaining position within acceptable parameters. How? Rail began, then steadied himself as another wave of disorientation hit. How is this possible? These distortions should be overwhelming your navigation systems. They are, Voss replied simply. That's why we don't rely on them. Eli flies by feel as much as by instruments. Isabel senses the patterns directly through her neural interface. And the rest of us. She tapped a small device on her temple. We're all linked. We feel what she feels, to a lesser degree. Rail stared at her in shock. Direct neural interfacing between multiple individuals was strictly prohibited under council law. The psychological risks were considered too great. That's extremely dangerous, he said. The mental contamination alone is a risk we accept. Voss finished for him. When conventional methods fail, Lieutenant, you adapt or you die. The Council chose to retreat from Veltrax. We chose to learn from it. A sudden alarm blared. The ship lurched violently, throwing Rail against his restraints. Pattern shift, Sato called out, her voice sharp with urgency. 40 degrees to port, forming now. I see it, Reeves responded, banking the ship hard. The view screen showed what appeared to be a rippling curtain of gray matter directly ahead, undulating with sickly purpose. Veltrax filament, Voss explained, her voice tight but controlled. Direct manifestation, extremely rare. Rail watched in horrified fascination as the filament seemed to reach toward them, space itself distorting around it. His scientific training cataloged details automatically, the fractal-like patterns in its movement, the way light bent around its form, even as his instincts screamed danger. Can't go around it, Reeves announced, patterns collapsing behind us. Through it, then, Voss decided. Full power to forward stabilizers. Isabel, find us a weak point. Captain, Rail protested. Direct contact with Veltrax matter will be survivable if we hit it correctly. Voss cut him off. This isn't our first filament. Lieutenant. Dr. Sato's body tensed visibly, the cables connecting her to the ship pulsing with increased energy. Junction point at bearing 165.8, 3 kilometers ahead. Structural integrity minimal. Strike point identified. Targeting, Reeves confirmed. Everyone hold on. This will get rough. Rail braced himself, watching in disbelief as Reeves deliberately accelerated toward the Veltrax manifestation. His entire training screamed against this approach. One did not charge toward danger. One analyzed, calculated, and found the safest path. Yet these humans were doing precisely the opposite, purposefully targeting the threat head-on. The ship shuddered as energy built in its forward section. Rail's console showed power being diverted from life support and secondary systems to strengthen the reality anchors. Impact in 5 seconds, Reeves announced calmly, as if they weren't about to collide with an entity that had destroyed dozens of advanced vessels. 4, 3, 2, 1. The universe seemed to invert itself. Rael felt his consciousness briefly separate from his body, saw impossible colors flood his vision, heard sounds that had no source. For a terrifying moment, he thought he felt the Veltrax itself, a vast, hungry awareness so alien that his mind could barely register its existence before recoiling. Then, reality snapped back. The ship groaned around them. Metal and composite materials stressed beyond their normal tolerances. Emergency lights flashed, and damage reports scrolled across multiple screens. "We're through," Reeves announced, his voice strained but triumphant. "Hull integrity at 87%. Stabilizers holding." "Check on our shadow," Voss ordered. Rael turned to his sensors, suddenly remembering his own ship. "The Celestial Envoy is still with us," he reported with relief, though the readings showed significant stress to their systems. "They're requesting status update. Tell them we encountered a filament and neutralized it," Voss instructed. "We'll continue on course." As Rael transmitted the message, he found himself struggling to process what he'd just witnessed. The humans hadn't simply navigated around the danger. They had engaged it directly, deliberately, using some combination of technology and intuition he couldn't fully comprehend. "Why did you do that?" he asked when the immediate crisis had passed. Standard procedure would be to retreat and find an alternate route. Voss looked at him with genuine surprise. "There was no alternate route. Lieutenant, the patterns were collapsing behind us. Retreating would have trapped us in a pocket of unstable space-time. But the risk was calculated," she finished. "Every decision in Veltrax space is a risk assessment. We chose the option with the highest survival probability. By charging directly at the threat, sometimes the only way out is through," she said simply. "Your council procedures were designed for predictable situations. Veltrax is anything but predictable. Out here, rigid thinking gets you killed." Rael fell silent, contemplating her words. Throughout his career, he had followed protocols meticulously, trusting in the collective wisdom of the Council's experts. Yet here, in this twisted region of space, those same protocols seemed inadequate, dangerously so. "We're approaching the second boundary layer," Sato announced. "Station signals detecting approximately 18 kilometers ahead, though spatial distortion makes exact distance calculations unreliable." "Any life signs?" Voss asked. Sato's expression tightened. "Indeterminate. There's significant interference, but the station's main power core is still functioning, which suggests at least partial structural integrity." Rael studied his own readings. The science station appeared as a flickering point of normal space surrounded by swirling anomalies. It looked impossibly distant and unreachable, a fragile bubble of reality in a sea of chaos. "How much worse will the distortions get?" he asked. "Exponentially worse." Reeves answered, "What we've encountered so far is nothing compared to what surrounds the station itself. That's why no rescue attempts have succeeded." "Yet you seem confident," Rael observed. "Not confident," Voss corrected. "Determined. There's a difference." She activated the ship-wide communication system. "All hands, prepare for deep zone penetration. Engineering. Divert all non-essential power to the reality anchors. Medical. Stand by for potential casualties. This is what we trained for. People." Rael watched the crew respond with practiced efficiency, each member moving to their assigned positions without question or hesitation. He was struck by their calm acceptance of the danger ahead, not the reckless bravado he had expected from humans, but a sober recognition of risk combined with resolute purpose. As the Tempest's grin continued its approach, cutting through increasingly severe reality distortions. Rail found himself reconsidering everything he thought he knew about humans. The Council records described them as dangerously unpredictable, too emotional for the careful balance of galactic governance. Yet, what he witnessed now was something different, an adaptability that his own species, for all their diplomatic sophistication, might have forgotten. The thought was both unsettling and, strangely, inspiring. The gray zone's inner boundary loomed ahead, a churning wall of distorted space that marked the transition to what humans called the deep zone. Beyond it lay the science station and whatever remained of its personnel. "Lieutenant," Voss said quietly, as final preparations were made, "I need to know you're prepared for what comes next. Once we cross that threshold, decisions will need to be made in seconds, not minutes. Lives will depend on immediate action." Rail met her gaze steadily. "I understand. Captain, I'll follow your lead." She studied him for a moment, then nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. Because out there, protocol is just the starting point. Survival is what matters." As the ship accelerated toward the boundary, Rail found himself strangely calm. For the first time in his career, he was stepping beyond the carefully defined parameters of his training and into a realm where intuition might matter more than analysis, where courage might outweigh caution. It was terrifying and exhilarating. "Boundary crossing in 30 seconds, Reeves announced. "All hands brace for transition." Rail tightened his restraints and focused on the mission ahead. 13 lives waited for rescue, if they still lived at all, and in this moment, their best hope lay with a crew of outcasts whom the galaxy had deemed too dangerous to include in its civilized society. The irony was not lost on him. Transition in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The universe dissolved around them. The transition felt like being torn apart and reconstructed, molecule by molecule. Rail's consciousness fractured into 1,000 pieces, each experiencing a different reality simultaneously. He saw his homeworld burning, saw it flourishing, saw it never having existed at all. He felt himself age and youth, live and die, evolve and devolve across countless timelines. When reality reassembled itself, he found himself hunched over his console, a thin trickle of cobalt blood running from his nasal cavity. Around him, the human crew recovered with practiced motions, clearly affected but functional. "Status report," Voss demanded, wiping a similar trickle of red from her own nose. "Reality anchors holding at 63%, came the response from engineering. "Hull integrity fluctuating, but within acceptable parameters." "Isabel." Voss turned to the xenobiologist, who appeared to be in a state of semi-consciousness, her augments glowing with unusual intensity. "I have it." Dr. Sato managed, her voice distant. "The station, 3 kilometers ahead. But the space between..." She grimaced. "It's wrong. Folded. Time runs differently there." Rail checked his own instruments, but found them nearly useless. Space itself seemed to twist and fold between their position and the science station, distances meaningless in the conventional sense. "The celestial envoy?" he asked. "Still with us," Reeves confirmed. "They're holding position in our wake, but their systems are under severe strain. Their conventional shields weren't designed for this." Voss made a quick decision. "Inform them to maintain current position. We'll proceed to the station alone and establish a stable corridor if possible." "Captain," Rail began to protest. "My mission." "We'll fail if your ship tries to follow us any closer." Voss interrupted firmly. Their systems can't handle the deep zone distortions. They'd be torn apart. Rail knew she was right, but the thought of remaining behind while others completed his mission grated against everything he'd been taught. Then I should transfer back to my vessel. No time, Voss said. And frankly, Lieutenant, we need you here. Your knowledge of the station and its personnel could be crucial once we arrive. Before Rail could respond, a new alarm sounded, different from the previous warnings. We've got movement, Reeves announced, his tone sharpening. Something's approaching from the station perimeter. The view screen struggled to render a coherent image, but eventually resolved to show a small vessel emerging from the distortion field surrounding the science station. Its design was unfamiliar, seemingly cobbled together from multiple technologies. Is that one of the station's escape pods? Rail asked, leaning forward. Dr. Sato's expression darkened. No, that's a Veltrax adaptation. It's using the station's materials, but it's been consumed and repurposed. Hostile, Voss demanded. Unknown, but assume yes, Reeves replied, hands moving across his controls. Weapons online. The thought of weapons being deployed caused Rail a moment of shock. Council vessels carried defensive systems only, and the use of offensive capabilities was strictly regulated. Captain, we should attempt communication first, he suggested quickly. It could be survivors who managed to… Oh, that's not a rescue vessel, Lieutenant. Sato cut in, her voice unnaturally certain. The Veltrax is probing, testing. It sensed our approach and it's… curious. The alien craft suddenly accelerated toward them, its movement jerky and unpredictable. As it drew closer, Rail could see its unnatural construction more clearly. Metal and composite materials fused in ways that defied engineering logic, pulsing with the same sickly gray energy that characterized Veltrax manifestations. Evasive maneuvers, Voss ordered calmly. Prepare countermeasures, but hold fire unless I give the order. The Tempest's grin banked sharply, attempting to maintain distance from the approaching vessel. But the Veltrax craft seemed to anticipate their movements, adjusting its course with impossible precision. It's reading our intentions, Sato said, her augments pulsing rapidly. The Veltrax has partially assimilated the station's sensor array. It can detect our engine outputs, predict our vector changes. Then let's be unpredictable, Voss decided. Eli, on my mark. Full reverse thrust, followed by lateral burn. Juno, prepare to vent plasma from the port nacelle. Create a sensor blind. Rail watched in astonishment as the crew prepared this unorthodox maneuver. No Council tactical manual would recommend such actions. The strain on the ship's systems alone made it recklessly dangerous. Execute now, Voss commanded. The ship lurched violently as the engines reversed thrust, then pivoted on its axis while simultaneously releasing a cloud of superheated plasma. The combined effect created a moment of chaotic movement and sensor interference that even the Veltrax craft couldn't immediately process. For a crucial few seconds, they vanished from its perception. Reeves capitalized on the confusion, executing a complex series of course changes that no automated system could have predicted. The Tempest's grin spiraled through the distorted space, using the reality fluctuations themselves as cover. It's lost us temporarily, Sato confirmed, but it's adapting quickly. We have maybe 2 minutes before it reacquires our signature. Then we use those 2 minutes, Voss decided. New approach vector to the station. Use the Veltrax craft's own wake pattern. Isabel, find us the entry point. The risk of following its path, Rail began, is less than the risk of being caught in open space. Voss finished. Sometimes you have to embrace the counterintuitive. Lieutenant, Dr. Sato guided them into the wake pattern left by the Veltrax vessel, a disturbing corridor of temporarily stabilized space-time. Following directly behind something that wanted to destroy them defied every tactical principle Rail had ever learned, yet he couldn't deny its effectiveness. They moved closer to the station with each passing second, the pursuing craft still searching for them in the wrong vectors. The science station finally came into clear view, a once elegant structure now partially consumed by Veltrax contamination, gray tendrils wrapped around its external modules, pulsating with unhealthy light. Sections of the hull had been transformed into unrecognizable configurations, metal and composite materials warped into organic-looking growths. Life signs? Voss asked tensely. Sato concentrated, her augments interfacing directly with the ship's sensors. Confirmed. Multiple readings. Concentrated in the central hub. 11. No. 12 distinct signatures. But they're weak. Captain. And one is wrong somehow. Wrong how? Rail asked, sudden dread filling him, fluctuating between organic and something else. Sato explained hesitantly. Partial Veltrax assimilation. Most likely. The implications chilled Rail to his core. Veltrax contamination of technology was one thing, but of living beings? The Council had theorized it was possible, but had no confirmed cases. We need to dock and extract the survivors immediately, he urged. Agreed, but standard docking is impossible. Reeves pointed out, those access ports are completely transformed. Voss studied the station's schematics, which Rail had transferred from his ship's database. There, she said, indicating a maintenance airlock on the station's underside. That section shows minimal contamination. We can use the emergency docking collar. The Veltrax vessel is reacquiring our position, Sato warned. Estimated interception in 7 minutes. Yeah. Then we have 6 minutes to dock and begin evacuation. Voss decided. Security team to the airlock. Medical. Prepare for multiple trauma cases. She turned to Rail. Lieutenant, I need you with the boarding party. The survivors will respond better to a council representative. Rail nodded. Despite his inner trepidation, he had never participated in a combat boarding action. His role had always been diplomatic, analytical. Yet he understood the logic of Voss's request. I'll need a suit, he said, rising from his station. Already prepared, Voss replied. Corridor Locker 6. And Lieutenant, these aren't standard Council EVA suits. They have integrated reality anchors, smaller versions of our ship's system. Follow the activation sequence exactly. As Rail moved toward the exit, a communication alert sounded from his console. Incoming transmission from the Celestial Envoy, the communications officer announced. Sure, put it through, Voss ordered. Lazarin Vox's metallic face appeared on the screen, his expression even colder than usual. Lieutenant Theorin, we're detecting extreme reality distortions around your position. The Council has transmitted new orders. Abort rescue attempt. Deploy data retrieval drones only. The risk to personnel is deemed unacceptable. Rail felt the weight of multiple gazes upon him, human and his own crew alike. The order was clear, legitimate, and entirely in line with Council priorities. Data before lives, especially when those lives were already considered forfeit. Agent Vok, he replied carefully. Interference is affecting transmission clarity. Please stand by for response after station boarding is complete. He cut the communication before Lazarin could object, aware that he had just deliberately defied a direct Council order. The act itself was shocking enough, but more shocking was how right it felt in the moment. Well, that buys us some time. Voss observed with a hint of approval in her voice. "But your Agent Vok doesn't strike me as the patient type." "He isn't," Rail confirmed. "We should proceed quickly." The docking operation was nothing like the methodical, carefully calibrated procedures Rail was accustomed to. Commander Reeves manually guided the Tempest's Grin to the maintenance airlock, compensating for reality fluctuations with a combination of instrument readings and what could only be described as intuition. The emergency docking collar, a flexible, adaptive structure, extended from their ship and sought purchase on the station's damaged exterior. Metal screeched against metal. Warning lights flashed as pressure differentials fluctuated wildly. Yet, somehow, the collar established a seal, imperfect but functional. "Boarding team, move now," Voss ordered through the comm system. "We have 5 minutes until company arrives." Rail joined the humans at the airlock, feeling awkward and ungainly in the modified EVA suit. Its control systems were unfamiliar, its weight distribution different from Council designs. But as Dr. Sato had explained during the rushed preparation, the suit's unconventional elements were critical for survival in Veltrax's contaminated environments. "The anchors create a bubble of stable reality around you." She'd told him, "It won't stop physical damage, but it will prevent space-time distortions from affecting your biology." The airlock cycled, and Rail found himself stepping into the science station alongside Captain Voss, Security Officer Drayson, and Dr. Sato. The corridor beyond the maintenance access was dimly lit by emergency power, but otherwise appeared relatively normal, a small mercy. "Life signs?" Voss asked, her voice slightly distorted through the suit's communication system. Sato consulted a handheld device interfaced with her neural augments. "Central hub, as expected. Approximately 60 meters ahead. But..." She frowned. "The spatial configuration between here and there is inconsistent." "Meaning?" Drayson asked, checking the unfamiliar weapon he carried, something Rail recognized as a pulse disruptor, designed to destabilize Veltrax's manifestations temporarily without causing structural damage. "Meaning the corridor won't behave as a straight line," Sato explained. "Distance, direction, they're fluid concepts in heavily contaminated areas." "Follow the emergency lighting," Rail suggested, pointing to the dim blue strips along the floor. "Station protocols mandate independent power systems for evacuation guidance. They should lead directly to the central hub." Voss nodded. "Good call. Stay close. Move quickly. Touch nothing unless absolutely necessary." They advanced through the corridor, which quickly began to display signs of increasing contamination. Wall panels bulged with unnatural growths. Ceiling fixtures had melted and reformed into twisted sculptures. Most disturbing were the occasional ripples that passed through the very structure itself, moments when solid matter briefly behaved like liquid before resolidifying. "The Veltrax is still actively transforming this section," Sato observed quietly. "Relatively recent infection." As they rounded a corner, the corridor ahead suddenly stretched impossibly long, then contracted again, a visual representation of the space-time distortions affecting the station. "Reality anchor compensation," Voss instructed calmly. "Focus on the physical sensations of walking. Ignore what your eyes tell you." Rail followed her advice, fighting the disorientation as they proceeded deeper into the station. His diplomatic training had included techniques for maintaining composure in alien environments. But nothing had prepared him for this level of fundamental wrongness. Every instinct screamed that he should retreat to safety, to the ordered reality of Council space. Yet the humans moved forward with grim determination, seemingly accepting the impossible environment as simply another challenge to overcome. They reached a junction where 3 corridors met at impossible angles, a spatial configuration that couldn't exist in normal space. The emergency lighting continued down all three paths. "This isn't right," Rael said, consulting his memory of the station schematics. "There should only be 2 corridors here." "Veltrax spatial manipulation," Sato confirmed. "It's creating shortcuts and detours through higher dimensions." "Which way to the survivors?" Voss demanded. Sato closed her eyes, concentrating on her augments. "The life signs are that way," she said, pointing to the leftmost corridor. "But there's something else. A concentration of Veltrax energy in the same direction. They're near the contamination source," Drayson concluded grimly. "Makes sense. They'd shelter as far from it as possible until they couldn't retreat any further." "Time check?" Voss asked. 3 minutes until the Veltrax vessel intercepts our ship," came the reply from Reeves through their comms. "Move out," Voss ordered, leading them down the leftmost corridor. The contamination grew visibly worse with each step. Sections of flooring had transformed entirely, becoming a spongy, pulsating substance that yielded sickeningly beneath their boots. Overhead lighting flickered between normal illumination and strange, sourceless glows that cast no shadows. "Lieutenant," Sato said suddenly, her voice tense, "are you aware of any council agents assigned to this research team?" "No," Rael replied, confused by the question. This was a purely scientific mission. "Why?" "Because I'm detecting a neural pattern consistent with council enforcement augmentation among the life signs ahead, similar to your Agent Vox signature." Rael felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's environmental systems. "That's impossible." The mission roster was clear. 13 scientists. No security personnel. "Could someone have been added without your knowledge?" Voss asked, her pace slowing slightly as they approached a sealed pressure door, the entrance to the central hub. "Possibly, but unlikely," Rael admitted. "The Council is secretive, but mission parameters are shared with commanding officers." "Well, we're about to find out," Drayson said, examining the door's control panel, which had been partially overtaken by Veltrax growth. "This isn't going to open normally. I'll need to bypass." While Drayson worked on the door, Voss activated her comlink. "Tempest, status report. Veltrax vessel approaching rapidly." Reeves responded, his voice tight with tension. 2 minutes to intercept. We're preparing countermeasures, but our options are limited while docked." "Understood. Be prepared for emergency departure on my signal." "What about us?" Rael asked quietly. Voss met his gaze through her helmet visor. "We get the survivors and get out. If timing becomes critical, the ship will detach and execute evasive maneuvers, then return for extraction when possible. And if return isn't possible, then we find another way." She replied with simple certainty. "There's always another way. Lieutenant, you just have to be willing to see it." The door suddenly hissed open, Drayson having managed to override its systems. Beyond lay the central hub, once a spacious command center, now a nightmarish landscape of twisted reality. The far wall had been completely overtaken by Veltrax growth, a massive, pulsating concentration of gray matter that periodically emitted waves of distortion. Workstations had melted and reformed into unrecognizable shapes, and huddled in the farthest corner, protected by a makeshift barricade of equipment, were the survivors. Rael counted quickly, 11 figures in Science Division uniforms, many visibly injured, all showing signs of extreme exhaustion. They looked up at the boarding party, with expressions ranging from disbelief to desperate hope. "Council Rescue Team," Rael announced, stepping forward. "We're here to evacuate you." One of the scientists, a gaunt Meridian female whose crystalline skin had dulled with stress, rose shakily to her feet. Lieutenant, is that really you? Rail recognized her immediately. Dr. Kreen Selva. Yes, it's me. We need to move quickly. Where are the others? Our scans showed 12 survivors. A shadow of fear crossed Selva's face. 11 now. 10 are changed. An hour ago. And Lazarin is... She glanced toward a separate chamber adjacent to the main hub. Lazarin? Rail repeated, confusion and dread mixing in his thoracic cavity. Lazarin Vok. He arrived 3 days before the contamination, another scientist explained, his voice bitter. Said he was a council observer, but when the Veltrax appeared, he knew things he shouldn't have known. Captain Voss stepped forward. Dr. Selva, I'm Captain Amara Voss of the Independent vessel. Tempest's grin. We need to evacuate immediately. Can everyone move under their own power? Selva nodded weakly. Yes, but... She lowered her voice. Lazarin has the research data. All of it. He took our backup cores when the contamination began. A sudden, horrible suspicion formed in Rail's mind. Dr. Selva, was the Veltrax contamination an accident, or was it deliberately introduced to the station? Before she could answer, the entire structure shuddered violently. Emergency alarms activated, and a new wave of distortion rippled through the room. Tempest to boarding team. Reeves's voice came urgently through the comms. Veltrax vessel is attempting to dock. It's attaching directly to the station's primary airlock. Begin evacuation now, Voss ordered sharply. Drayson, escort the scientists back to our ship. Sato, guide them through the spatial distortions. Lieutenant, with me. We need that research data. Captain, Rail protested, the priority is the survivors. The priority is understanding what happened here. Voss countered. If the Veltrax was deliberately introduced, this is more than a rescue mission. It's preventing the next attack. She turned to the scientists. Go with my crew. We'll be right behind you. As Drayson and Sato began organizing the evacuation, Voss and Rail approached the adjacent chamber where Selva had indicated Lazarin was located. The door was sealed, but showed signs of recent access. Your Agent Vok is aboard our mission vessel, Voss said quietly. So who is this Lazarin? I don't know, Rail admitted, but council agents sometimes operate in pairs, or with duplicates. Duplicates? Voss looked sharply at him. Synthetic copies, near identical but with specialized programming for high-risk missions. Rail felt sick acknowledging this reality, one of the Council's many secretive practices that diplomats like himself were expected to tacitly accept but never discuss openly. Voss's expression hardened as she examined the door control. Stand back, she instructed, pulling a small device from her suit's utility compartment. She placed it against the control panel, and a brief pulse of energy disabled the locking mechanism. The door slid open to reveal a smaller chamber, once a private research lab, now transformed into something between a control center and a shrine. Holographic displays showed the progress of Veltrax contamination throughout the station. Sample containers held pulsating gray matter in various stages of development. And in the center stood a figure instantly recognizable to Rail. Lazarin Vok, or his exact duplicate, turned toward them with an expression of mild surprise that quickly transformed into cold calculation. Lieutenant Theorin, he said, his metallic features reflecting the eerie light of the displays. Your arrival is unexpected but not unwelcome. The experiment has reached its final phase, and witnesses are appropriate. Experiment. Rael stepped forward, horror and anger battling for dominance in his usually composed mind. You deliberately released Veltrax on this station. Those are Council scientists out there. Acceptable losses for invaluable data. Lazarin replied calmly. The Veltrax represents the greatest technological opportunity since the discovery of faster-than-light travel. Its ability to transcend conventional physics, to manipulate reality itself, properly controlled. It could reshape the galaxy. Controlled? Voss interjected incredulously. You're delusional. The Veltrax can't be controlled. It consumes. It transforms. It destroys. Lazarin's cold smile widened slightly. That's the perspective of those who fear what they don't understand. Captain. The Council retreated from Veltrax study because they lacked vision. But certain factions within the Council hierarchy recognized its potential. You're working for the Evolutionary Directive, Rael realized, naming a secretive and radical faction rumored to operate within the Council's highest levels. They've always advocated for aggressive technological advancement, regardless of the risks. Advancement is survival, Lieutenant, Lazarin stated flatly. While the Council debates and deliberates, other powers grow stronger. Humanity proved that when they developed reality anchors that we thought impossible, the directive merely acknowledges that sometimes controlled risks are necessary for progress. A violent tremor shook the station, stronger than before. Warning lights flashed on Lazarin's displays. Captain, the Veltrax vessel has breached the primary airlock, came Drayson's urgent voice over the comm. We've got the scientists aboard, but the contamination is spreading rapidly toward our position. We need to detach immediately. Do it, Voss ordered without hesitation. Get them to safety. We'll find another way out. You just stranded us here, Rael observed, a strange calm settling over him despite the dire situation. Temporarily, Voss corrected. Eli knows his job. He'll draw the Veltrax vessel away, then return for extraction. Lazarin's laugh held no warmth. An optimistic assessment, Captain, but ultimately irrelevant. This station's transformation is nearly complete. In moments, it will become a new Veltrax node, a seed that will spread throughout this sector. That's why you're still here. Rael realized. You're not just studying it, you're directing it somehow. Symbiosis is the more accurate term, Lazarin replied, pulling back his sleeve to reveal an arm partially transformed by Veltrax matter, gray tendrils weaving through his metallic skin. I provide guidance, it provides evolution. Voss raised her pulse disruptor, aiming it steadily at Lazarin's chest. The research data, where is it? Lazarin gestured to a small device on a nearby console, a standard Council data core. Everything is there, the entire experiment, from conception to culmination. Take it if you wish. Soon. Such primitive storage methods will be unnecessary. Another tremor rocked the station, more violent than before. Structural integrity warnings flashed across multiple displays. Final phase initiation detected, announced an automated system. Core transformation at 97%. Station-wide transformation imminent. We need to leave. Now, Voss said urgently, grabbing the data core and securing it to her suit. There's nowhere to go. Lazarin observed calmly. Your ship has departed. The station will fully transform in approximately 7 minutes. I suggest you embrace the inevitable. As I have. There's always another way, Voss repeated, turning to Rael. The station should have emergency escape pods. Maintenance level, Section C, Rael confirmed. But with this level of contamination, there's no guarantee they're still functional. Better than waiting for death. Voss decided. She turned back to Lazarin. Last chance. Come with us. The transformed agent smiled thinly. I'm exactly where I need to be. Captain, evolution awaits. Voss didn't waste another moment. Move, she ordered Rail, heading for the exit. As they turned to leave, Lazarin suddenly lunged forward with inhuman speed, his transformed arm extending impossibly to grab Voss's shoulder. Gray tendrils began to spread from his fingers into her suit material. "Oh, the data stays," he hissed, his voice distorting. "The directive must know all." Without hesitation, Rail drew his standard-issue neural disruptor, a non-lethal weapon designed to temporarily incapacitate, and fired directly at Lazarin's chest. Against a normal opponent, it would have caused immediate unconsciousness. Lazarin merely staggered, the Veltrax transformation apparently providing some immunity to the neural effect, but the momentary disruption was enough for Voss to break free. Drawing her own weapon and firing a concentrated pulse that severed Lazarin's extended arm, gray matter splattered across the floor, writhing with independent motion before beginning to creep back toward its host. "Run!" Voss shouted, shoving Rail toward the exit. They fled the chamber as Lazarin's enraged howl followed them, a sound that began as humanoid but quickly distorted into something otherworldly. The central hub was now empty. The scientists evacuated. The Veltrax growth on the far wall had expanded visibly, pulsating with increased intensity. "Which way to the maintenance level?" Voss demanded as they reached the main corridor. Rail activated his suit's navigation system, overlaying the station schematics with their current position. "Down 2 levels. There should be an emergency ladder access through that junction." They raced through corridors that grew increasingly unstable, reality itself seeming to flex and warp around them. What should have been straight passages curved impossibly. Gravity fluctuated, making each step a conscious effort. Without the reality anchors in their suits, Rail knew they would have been lost in the distortions, or worse, transformed by them. The emergency access hatch appeared ahead, partially deformed but still recognizable. Voss reached it first, wrenching it open with augmented strength. The vertical shaft beyond showed signs of contamination, but remained passable. "I'll go first," she decided, swinging onto the ladder. "Stay close." They descended rapidly, the metal rungs occasionally squirming beneath their grasp, matter in the process of transformation. Above them, strange lights and sounds pursued through the shaft, evidence of Veltrax activity increasing. "Lazarin," Rail asked between labored breaths. "Or what's left of him," Voss confirmed grimly. "The symbiosis he thought he controlled is consuming him completely. That's the problem with believing you can master something beyond your comprehension. Eventually, it masters you." They reached the maintenance level, a warren of narrow corridors filled with equipment and supply storage. Unlike the upper levels, the contamination here appeared more recent, less established. Emergency lighting still functioned normally, casting harsh shadows rather than the eerie, sourceless illumination of fully transformed areas. "Section C should be this way," Rail indicated, consulting the schematics again. They moved as quickly as the cramped spaces allowed, aware that time was rapidly running out. The station's structural integrity continued to deteriorate, vibrations running constantly through the decking beneath their feet. 4 minutes to complete transformation, Voss estimated, checking a readout on her suit's wrist display. Maybe less. There, Rail pointed ahead to a sealed doorway marked with the universal symbol for escape vehicles. Emergency pod access. The door opened automatically as they approached, a good sign that systems in this section remained at least partially functional. Beyond lay a small chamber containing 2 escape pods, their sleek forms a stark contrast to the utilitarian surroundings. 2 pods, Voss observed, one for the data, one for us. What? No, Rail objected. We go together. The data is secure in your suit, Too risky, Voss replied, already moving to the first pod and beginning the activation sequence. If both are functional, fine. But if only one works, the data has to make it out. What happened here can't happen again. Before Rael could argue further, a thunderous impact shook the entire chamber. The access door behind them buckled inward, metal screaming as something on the other side applied enormous pressure. "He's here," Voss said, working faster on the pod's systems. "Check the second pod. Now." Rael moved to the second escape vehicle, finding its systems responsive but displaying numerous warnings. Power at 60%. Navigation systems compromised. It might launch, but reaching safe distance is uncertain. "Better than certain death," Voss replied as the first pod systems came online, status lights shifting from red to green. "This one's fully functional. The data goes in it." The access door burst inward with a final metallic shriek. Through the twisted opening came a figure that only vaguely resembled Lazarin Vok. His humanoid form had been grotesquely transformed, limbs elongated and multiplied, torso bulging with pulsating growths, face partially subsumed into a mass of writhing gray matter. Only his eyes remained recognizable, burning with malevolent intelligence. "The data stays." The thing that had been Lazarin rasped, its voice layered with multiple tones. The transformation must continue. Voss reacted instantly, firing her pulse disruptor at the creature. The energy blast tore through its form, causing temporary disruption, but no lasting damage. Gray matter flowed like liquid to repair the injury almost immediately. "Get the pod ready," she ordered Rael, positioning herself between him and the advancing monstrosity. "I'll hold it off." "Both pods are ready," Rael reported, finalizing the launch sequence for the second vehicle. "But Captain—" "No time to argue," Voss cut him off. "The data has to make it out. Someone has to pilot the second pod." She fired again at Lazarin, forcing the creature to momentarily recoil. "It should be you. Your council will listen to you. They need to know what happened here." The creature lunged forward with impossible speed, multiple limbs reaching for them. Voss met its charge, her combat training evident in every movement. She ducked beneath one elongated arm, fired point-blank into what had once been Lazarin's torso, then pivoted to avoid another attack. But the confined space gave her little room to maneuver. One grasping appendage caught her leg, gray tendrils immediately beginning to spread across her suit's surface. "Go!" she shouted to Rael, using her free hand to detach the data core from her suit and toss it to him. "Get that to your council. Tell them what happened here." Rael caught the device reflexively, his diplomatic training momentarily overridden by instinct. But as he moved toward the functional escape pod, another realization struck him, one that contradicted everything his cautious nature and council indoctrination had taught him. He couldn't leave her behind, with a decision that felt simultaneously wrong and absolutely right. Rael activated the launch sequence for the first escape pod, empty except for the data core he placed securely inside. The pod's doors sealed, and emergency launch procedures initiated automatically. "What are you doing?" Voss demanded. Still struggling against the creature's grasp, gray contamination spreading slowly up her leg despite her suit's protective field. "Finding another way," Rael replied, turning back to the second pod, the damaged one, and finalizing its launch preparation. "We go together or not at all." The first pod launched with a thunderous roar, its ejection systems blasting it clear of the station and immediately activating its emergency thrusters. The creature that had been Lazarin howled in rage, momentarily distracted by the departure of its prize. In that crucial moment, Rail charged forward, neural disruptor firing repeatedly at the creature's grip on Voss's leg. The combined assault, Voss's strength and Rail's precisely targeted energy pulses, finally broke its hold. "Move!" Rail shouted, half dragging Voss toward the second pod. Her suit's leg showed alarming signs of contamination, gray tendrils spreading across the material, but the inner containment layer appeared to be holding. For now. They reached the pod as the creature recovered and launched itself toward them with supernatural speed. Rail slammed his hand on the emergency door control, and the pod's hatch began to close, too slowly. Far too slowly. Voss saw it too. With a grimace of determination, she shoved Rail fully inside the pod, then turned to face the oncoming monstrosity. "Close it manually from inside," she ordered, bracing herself in the doorway. "I'm not leaving you," Rail protested. "Not planning on being left," Voss replied through gritted teeth. As the creature reached them, she met its charge directly, not retreating, but advancing into its grasp. For a terrible moment, Rail thought she had sacrificed herself. Then he understood her strategy, using the creature's own momentum. Voss executed a complex martial maneuver, redirecting its charge. Both she and the transformed Lazarin tumbled into the pod, tangled in a deadly embrace. "Emergency override! Close and launch!" Voss gasped, one hand finding the internal control panel while her other arm held the creature's main mass away from her face. The pod door slammed shut, sealing them inside with the monstrosity. Acceleration pressed them all against the rear bulkhead as launch systems engaged. The creature howled in rage and confusion, multiple limbs flailing in the confined space. Rail recovered first, finding his neural disruptor and firing repeatedly at what remained of Lazarin's head, the seeming center of the transformation. Each blast caused momentary disruption of the creature's cohesion, giving Voss precious seconds to fight free of its grasp. "The airlock," she managed, nodding toward the pod's emergency exit system, understanding immediately. Rail began the emergency decompression sequence, a last resort measure designed for fire suppression, not for ejecting hostile entities, but the principle was sound. The creature sensed their intention, its attacks becoming more frenzied. One whipping appendage caught Rail across his helmet, cracking the visor. Warning indicators flashed in his display as his suit's integrity was compromised. "Now!" Voss shouted. Having maneuvered herself and Rail to secure positions, Rail hit the final control. The emergency airlock activated. Outer door opening while specialized force fields maintained partial pressure in the pod itself. The explosive decompression caught the creature mid-lunge, its amorphous form suddenly subject to the vacuum of space. For a moment, it clung tenaciously to the airlock rim, gray tendrils seeking purchase on the pod's interior. Then, Voss fired her pulse disruptor one final time, the energy blast severing its remaining connections to the vehicle. The thing that had been Lazarin Vock tumbled away into the void, its form already beginning to disperse without a host to maintain cohesion. The airlock resealed automatically, pressure normalizing in the pod's cabin. Emergency systems activated to compensate for the damage to Rail's suit, sealing the cracked visor with emergency polymer. "Navigation?" Voss asked, dragging herself to the pilot's console despite the obvious pain from her partially contaminated leg. Rail checked the systems, his heart sinking at the readings. "Minimal. Thrusters are functional, but guidance is compromised. And life support." He hesitated. 12 hours at current capacity. "Better than 0. Voss replied with grim humor. Through the viewport, they could see the space station behind them, now almost completely transformed, its structure barely recognizable beneath pulsating gray matter. "Look!" As they watched, the station's remaining recognizable features dissolved into the amorphous mass of Veltrax material. Then, with a silent flash of energy, the entire structure collapsed in upon itself, imploding into what appeared to be a singularity before winking out of existence entirely. Did it destroy itself? Rail wondered aloud. No, Voss replied softly. It evolved, transformed into something beyond conventional spacetime. That's what Veltrax does at full maturation. It creates nodes, doorways to somewhere else. The pod's emergency thrusters continued to carry them away from the catastrophe, but the gray zone's distortions remained all around them. Reality itself rippled and warped outside the viewport, stars shifting position in impossible ways. Without proper navigation, we'll never find our way through the distortion field. Rail acknowledged, the weight of their situation settling upon him, and with limited life support. We did what mattered, Voss said firmly. The data got out. The scientists are safe. Whatever happens to us, that's the important part. Rail nodded slowly, surprised to find he agreed with her assessment. His entire career had been built on caution, on following protocols designed to minimize risk. Yet here, facing almost certain death, he felt a strange sense of peace, even accomplishment. Captain, he said after a moment, I owe you an apology. For what? She asked, grimacing as she examined the contamination on her suit leg, which appeared to have stopped spreading but still pulsed with unhealthy energy. For the Council's assessment of humanity, for believing you were too dangerous, too emotional for galactic society. He gestured toward the viewpoint and the gray zone beyond. We pride ourselves on rational thought, on careful analysis. Yet when faced with true danger, we retreated. We analyzed from a distance while people died. And we charged in head first. Consequences be damned. Voss added with a wry smile. Both approaches have their merits and their flaws. Lieutenant. Rail, he corrected. I think we're beyond rank at this point. Amara, then, she replied, and for what it's worth, humanity isn't as isolated as the Council might believe. We've found our place, made our own connections, built our own future. The pod's communication system suddenly crackled with static, unexpected in the distortion field where normal transmissions were impossible. Escape pod, this is Captain Rivera of the Earth vessel, Horizon's Edge. Do you read us? Voss and Rail exchanged startled glances. This is Captain Voss of the Tempest's Grin, she replied immediately. We read you. Horizon's Edge. Our navigation is compromised, and we have limited life support. Understood. Captain Voss, we have your position and are moving to intercept. Stand by for retrieval in approximately 20 minutes. After the transmission ended, Rail stared at Voss in confusion. Another human ship? Out here? That's impossible. The statistical probability of another vessel just happening to be in this exact region of space is virtually zero. A small smile played across Voss's lips. It's not coincidence. Rail, humanity has been studying Veltrax for years, far longer than the Council knows. The Tempest's Grin isn't a lone operation. We're part of a coordinated response network. A network? But how? The resources required, the organizational structure. Rail's diplomatic mind raced through the implications. The Council monitors all major fleet movements in charted space. The key word being charted, Voss replied. After our departure from the Council, humanity had to adapt. We established outposts in regions considered too dangerous or unprofitable for mainstream commerce. We developed technologies the Council deemed too risky to pursue. She gestured to her augmented forearm. Reality anchors are just one example. Before Rail could respond, the viewport suddenly filled with light as a vessel emerged from the swirling distortions of the gray zone. Unlike the battle-scarred Tempest's Grin, the Horizon's Edge appeared sleek and purposeful, clearly designed specifically for operations in Veltrax's contaminated space. Its hull featured similar crystalline structures to those Rail had observed on the Grin, but integrated seamlessly into the ship's architecture rather than added as modifications. They were waiting, Rail realized, observing the station, monitoring the situation. Standard protocol, Voss confirmed. No vessel enters Veltrax's territory without backup standing by. We've learned the hard way that solo missions rarely return. Then why tell me you were alone? Why the pretense of a desperate rescue attempt? Voss's expression turned serious. Because it wasn't a pretense. Rail, the rescue was genuine and genuinely dangerous. But more importantly, we needed to understand the Council's involvement. If we'd revealed our full capabilities immediately, Agent Vok would have reported everything to his superiors. Rail finished the thought. And whatever faction he represents would know exactly what humanity is capable of. Precisely. Sometimes the appearance of desperation conceals strength. She smiled faintly. A lesson humanity learned during our early wars, long before we reached the stars. The pod shuddered as tractor beams from the Horizon's Edge locked onto it, drawing them toward an open docking bay. As they approached, Rail could see other vessels within, small, specialized craft designed for different aspects of Veltrax's research and containment. The Council believes humanity withdrew from galactic affairs after our exclusion, Voss said quietly. In reality, we simply focused our attention on threats the Council was unwilling to confront directly. Veltrax is just one of them. The pod settled gently onto the docking bay floor. Through the viewport, Rail could see a medical team waiting, along with what appeared to be decontamination specialists in advanced isolation suits. "Oh, what happens now?" he asked. Suddenly aware that he, a Council official, was about to enter what amounted to a secret human military installation. Now? Voss winced as she shifted her contaminated leg. Now you get to see how humanity really operates. Lieutenant, and then you'll have a choice to make. The docking bay of the Horizon's Edge was a hive of coordinated activity. As soon as the pod's door opened, medical personnel moved in with practiced efficiency. Voss was quickly transferred to a specialized containment stretcher, her contaminated suit leg sealed within a transparent field that pulsed with energy similar to the reality anchors. Preliminary assessment shows minimal biological penetration, announced a human female in medical attire. Containment protocols holding, we'll need immediate surgery to remove the affected tissue. Do whatever's necessary, Dr. Chen replied, a tall, imposing human male who had entered the bay, clearly someone in authority, judging by the way others deferred to him. Captain Voss knew the risks. I'm right here, Marcus, Voss called from the stretcher, sounding annoyed. And it's just a leg. I've lost worse parts. The man, Marcus, approached Rail next, studying him with open curiosity. Lieutenant Theorin, I'm Admiral Marcus Rivera, Earth Defense Force, Veltrax's Containment Division. Welcome aboard the Horizon's Edge. Earth Defense Force. The name sent a chill through Rail's thoracic cavity. Council intelligence reports had mentioned rumors of a human military organization operating beyond Council space, but most analysts had dismissed it as exaggeration or myth, a boogeyman invented to justify increased security budgets. Your suit's been compromised, Rivera continued, gesturing to Rail's cracked visor. "Our scans show no contamination, but we'll need to process you through decontamination as a precaution." Rail found his diplomatic training reasserting itself despite the extraordinary circumstances. "I appreciate your assistance, Admiral. However, I should contact my vessel as soon as possible. They'll be concerned about my status. The Celestial Envoy has already been notified of your survival." Rivera replied smoothly. Captain Voss's ship, the Tempest's Grin, rendezvoused with them after evacuating the scientists. They're currently holding position at the edge of the gray zone, awaiting your return. So the human vessel had survived its encounter with the Veltrax craft. Rail felt a wave of relief, quickly followed by confusion. "How are you communicating through the distortion field? Our technology can't maintain stable signals in Veltrax territory." Rivera exchanged glances with a nearby officer, seeming to make a decision. "Lieutenant, you've earned some answers. But first, let's get you processed and into some normal clothing. Diplomatic discussions are always more comfortable without emergency survival gear." An hour later, decontaminated and dressed in a simple Earth-style uniform provided by his hosts, Rail found himself in what appeared to be a command briefing room. Large view screens displayed real-time data on the gray zone, including visualization of distortion patterns that seemed impossibly detailed given the chaotic nature of Veltrax effects. Admiral Rivera entered, accompanied by a severe-looking human female whose uniform bore different insignia. "Lieutenant Theorin, this is Director Sarah Kaiden, Intelligence Division. She's been coordinating our Veltrax research initiatives for the past 5 years." Kaiden nodded curtly. "Lieutenant, I understand you witnessed Agent Vok's transformation firsthand." "A duplicate of Agent Vok," Rail corrected automatically. "The real Lazarin Vok is aboard my vessel." "Are you certain of that?" Kaiden asked, her expression unreadable. The question sent an uncomfortable ripple through Rail's consciousness. Could there have been a switch? Could the Lazarin who had accompanied his mission be yet another duplicate? Or worse, already compromised by Veltrax? "I cannot be absolutely certain," he admitted, "but the implications you're suggesting are precisely why humanity has maintained its distance from Council politics." Rivera interjected, "The evolutionary directive isn't a minor splinter faction. Lieutenant, it's a powerful movement within the Council's highest levels, advocating for technological advancement at any cost, including controlled introduction of Veltrax contamination," Kaiden added, activating one of the displays. It showed a map of known Veltrax appearances throughout the galaxy, far more numerous than Rail had been aware of. "Our analysis indicates that approximately 30% of documented Veltrax outbreaks over the past decade show evidence of deliberate release rather than natural occurrence." Rail stared at the display in horror. That can't be correct. The Council would never sanction." "Not officially," Rivera agreed. "But certain elements within the Council structure appear to believe Veltrax can be controlled, weaponized, or exploited. Lazarin Vok's experiment was simply the latest attempt." "How do you know all this?" Rail demanded, diplomatic reserve cracking under the weight of these revelations. Kaiden and Rivera exchanged glances again. Then Kaiden activated another display, this one showing footage from what appeared to be the science station, recorded before the contamination. It showed Lazarin Vok accessing a secure laboratory area, deliberately introducing a sample of gray matter into the station's research containment field. "We've been monitoring Veltrax research stations for years," Kaiden explained. "After the third accidental contamination event, we implemented remote surveillance protocols. When we detected Lazarin Vok's arrival at this particular station, especially given his known connections to the directive, We dispatch the Tempest's Grin to observe and intervene if necessary. You knew, Rail said slowly, the pieces falling into place. You knew what would happen before the station ever sent its distress call. We suspected, Rivera corrected, but we needed proof, documentation of deliberate Veltrax release by a council agent. The kind of evidence that even the most skeptical council member couldn't ignore. The data core, Rail realized. The one Captain Voss made sure escaped on the first pod. Already retrieved and analyzed, Kaiden confirmed. It contains Lazarin's complete research notes, including direct orders from senior members of the Evolutionary Directive to proceed with controlled exposure testing, despite known risks to personnel. Rail sank back in his chair, mind reeling from the implications. Throughout his career, he had believed in the Council's fundamental commitment to peace, stability, and the greater good, despite its bureaucratic flaws and occasional missteps. The idea that high-ranking officials would deliberately risk Veltrax contamination, sacrificing innocent lives for technological advancement, shook the very foundation of his worldview. Why tell me this? He finally asked. I'm a council diplomat, by your own assessment. The council has been compromised by this directive. Sharing this information with me could jeopardize your operations. Rivera leaned forward, his expression intense but not unkind. Because sometimes, Lieutenant Theorin, the only way to fight corruption is from within. The council isn't evil. It's infiltrated. There are still good people trying to maintain the principles it was founded on. We believe you may be one of them. Based on what? My actions during the rescue? That hardly qualifies as a comprehensive character assessment. Based on your file, Kaiden replied matter-of-factly. We have sources within the council bureaucracy. Lieutenant, your psychological profiles, mission reports, diplomatic assessments. They paint a picture of someone who genuinely believes in the ideals the council claims to uphold, someone who might act on evidence of corruption, even at personal risk. Rail felt a strange mixture of violation and validation. The thought of human intelligence operatives accessing his confidential council records was disturbing, yet their assessment of his character wasn't wrong. He did believe in those ideals, perhaps now more than ever. Seeing how they had been betrayed. What do you want from me? He asked directly. Initially, a full report on what you witnessed. Rivera said, confirmation of our evidence from a council official would strengthen our case considerably. Beyond that, potentially your assistance in presenting this information to council members we believe are untainted by directive influence. You're asking me to become an informant, a spy within my own government. We're asking you to be what you've always been. Kaiden countered, a defender of council principles, just with better information than you had before. Before Rail could respond, the door opened to admit a medical officer. Admiral, Captain Voss is out of surgery. Decontamination was successful, though she'll need regenerative therapy for the removed tissue. Thank you, Doctor. Rivera acknowledged. Please inform her we'll visit shortly. He turned back to Rail. Would you like to see her? She asked for you specifically. Rail nodded, grateful for the momentary reprieve from the weighty decision before him. As they walked through the corridors of the horizon's edge, he observed the crew they passed, humans of diverse appearances working alongside a surprising number of non-human species, including several he recognized as having withdrawn from Council Association around the same time as Earth. You've built alliances, he noted. Partnerships, Rivera corrected, based on mutual interest rather than political expediency. When the Council began prioritizing stability over security, many species recognized the same threats we did. The medical bay was the blend of familiar and foreign technology, some recognizably council standard, others clearly of human or other origin. Captain Voss lay on a recovery bed, her leg encased in a regenerative field. Despite her recent surgery, she appeared alert and remarkably composed. "Lieutenant." She greeted him with a hint of her characteristic intensity. Or should I say spy in training? "I haven't agreed to anything yet," Rael replied, unable to suppress a small smile despite the gravity of the situation. "Joe, but you're considering it," she observed. "That's more than most council officials would do." Rivera and Kaiden discreetly moved to the far side of the medical bay, giving them a semblance of privacy. Rael sat in the chair beside Voss's bed, suddenly aware of how exhausted he felt after the ordeal they had shared. "Why did you do it?" he asked quietly. "Risk your life for council scientists? For a mission that wasn't even yours?" "Because it was the right thing to do," she answered simply. "And because preventing Veltrax from spreading is everyone's mission, whether they acknowledge it or not. The council would say you acted out of emotional impulse rather than rational calculation." "And were they wrong?" Voss challenged. "Emotion drove me to respond to that distress call. Empathy made me care about those scientists. Anger at injustice made me oppose the directive's plans." She gestured to her wounded leg. "But calculation and training kept me alive long enough to complete the mission. Humanity's strength has always been the integration of both, feeling and thinking, passion and precision." Rael considered her words. Throughout the rescue mission, he had witnessed the humans making decisions that seemed reckless by council standards, yet each had been undergirded by careful preparation, specialized training, and technical innovation. They hadn't abandoned reason for emotion, they had harnessed both. "The council was wrong about your species," he admitted, "about many things. It seems—" "Not wrong," Voss corrected. "Incomplete, just as we were incomplete in our understanding of galactic cooperation. Isolation taught us to value what the council offered, even as we developed alternatives to what it couldn't provide." A notification chimed, and Rivera approached them again. "Lieutenant, the Celestial Envoy is requesting your immediate return. They're concerned about your extended absence." "And Agent Vok is likely growing suspicious," Rael surmised, "especially if he's connected to the directive. We can arrange transport to the rendezvous point," Rivera offered. "But first, we need your decision. Will you help us expose the directive's activities?" Rael looked from Rivera to Voss, then around the medical bay, where various species worked together with a common purpose. In that moment, he saw a vision of what the council was meant to be, not a bureaucratic hierarchy imposing order, but a genuine partnership of diverse perspectives united by shared principles. "I'll need copies of all evidence," he said finally, "and a secure communication channel. If I'm to present this to untainted council members, I'll need irrefutable proof." "You'll have it," Kaiden assured him, approaching with a small device. "This quantum entanglement communicator is undetectable by standard council security scans. It will allow you to contact us regardless of distance or interference." Rael accepted the device, recognizing technology far beyond current council capabilities. "And if I'm discovered, the directive won't hesitate to eliminate a threat." "Then you'll need this as well," Voss said, removing a small pendant from around her neck and handing it to him. "Emergency beacon. Activate it, and the nearest human vessel will respond. Official channels be damned." The simple act of acceptance felt monumental, a departure from everything his training had taught him about proper diplomatic conduct. Yet it also felt right, aligned with the deeper principles that had drawn him to council service in the first place. "I should warn you," he said with unexpected lightness. "I've never been a spy before. My species is known for many talents, but deception isn't prominent among them." "You're not a spy," Rivera corrected. "You're an ally. There's a difference." An hour later, Rail found himself aboard a sleek human shuttle, approaching the rendezvous point where the celestial envoy waited. The events of the past days swirled in his mind, not just the horrors he had witnessed, but the revelations that had followed. He felt as though he had glimpsed behind a curtain he hadn't even known existed, seeing both darkness and light that the Council had kept hidden. As the shuttle prepared to dock, he composed his thoughts and prepared the explanation he would give to his crew, a carefully edited version of events that omitted any mention of human military capability or the evidence against the directive. Those secrets would need to wait for the right moment, the right allies within the Council structure. "We've established contact with your vessel," the shuttle pilot informed him. "They're somewhat agitated about your unorthodox rescue." "I imagine so," Rail replied, straightening his borrowed uniform. His own had been too contaminated to risk returning aboard. Council procedures don't generally approve of being rescued by non-aligned entities, especially ones they spent decades trying to marginalize, the pilot added with a trace of bitterness. "Perhaps that will change," Rail suggested, "when the truth emerges." The pilot glanced back at him, surprised. "You really believe you can reform the Council, after everything you've learned?" Rail considered the question carefully. Not reform, perhaps, but reminded of its purpose. The Council was founded on principles worth preserving: cooperation, peaceful exchange of knowledge, mutual protection. The fact that some have corrupted those principles doesn't invalidate them. The shuttle docked with a gentle shudder. Through the viewport, Rail could see a Council security team waiting in the airlock, led by a visibly agitated Tyvus. "Good luck, Lieutenant," the pilot said as the docking sequence completed. "Remember, you're not alone out there anymore." As Rail prepared to disembark, he felt the weight of the quantum communicator concealed in his uniform and the emergency beacon tucked safely away. The path ahead would be dangerous, filled with political minefields and potential betrayal. Yet, for the first time in his career, he felt truly aligned with the principles he had sworn to uphold, not just the letter of Council law, but its spirit. "Lieutenant Theorin!" Tyvus exclaimed as he entered the airlock. "We feared you lost when the station collapsed. How did you escape? Where is the human vessel and the research data?" Behind her, Rail noted Lazarin Vok watching with cold intensity, his metallic features betraying no emotion. Was this the real Lazarin, or another duplicate, a loyal Council agent, or a directive operative? For now, it was impossible to know. "A remarkable series of events, Officer Tyvus," Rail replied calmly, slipping back into his diplomatic persona with practiced ease. "I believe a full debriefing is in order. There's much to report about what I witnessed in the gray zone." As he walked through the familiar corridors of his vessel, surrounded by his crew's questions and concerns, Rail felt strangely detached from the environment he had once considered home. His perspective had been irrevocably altered, not just by the horrors of Veltrax's contamination, but by the revelation that courage and conviction could exist outside the careful structures he had always trusted. In the days that followed, as the Celestial Envoy completed its journey back to Council space, Rail composed his official report. It was a masterpiece of diplomatic language, factually accurate, yet selectively detailed, highlighting the rescue of the scientists while omitting certain aspects of human capability. The data core, recovered from the escape pod by automated retrieval systems, provided evidence of research irregularities that warranted further investigation at the highest levels. Lazarin Vok, perhaps suspecting Rail knew more than he revealed, maintained a careful distance. His own report, transmitted directly to Council Enforcement Command, undoubtedly contained his suspicions, but without proof. They remained just that. When they finally reached Meridian Station, the Council's current administrative hub, Rail requested a private audience with High Counselor Tehran, one of the few senior officials his human allies believed untainted by directive influence. The request was granted with surprising speed, perhaps a reflection of the unusual nature of the mission outcome. Standing in the Counselor's private chamber, surrounded by the elegant minimalism of traditional Meridian architecture, Rail felt the weight of the moment. What he was about to do would either begin the salvation of the Council he believed in, or mark him as a traitor to the institution he had served his entire career. Lieutenant Theorin, Counselor Tehran greeted him, her crystalline form catching the light as she moved. Your report makes for fascinating reading, particularly the sections regarding human intervention. It's been many years since we've had such direct interaction with Earth vessels. The circumstances were exceptional, Counselor, Rail replied carefully. Indeed, the rescue of 11 of our scientists is commendable, as is the recovery of research data that might help us better understand the Veltrax phenomenon. She paused, studying him with the penetrating gaze characteristic of her species. Yet I sense there is more to your experience than appears in the official record. Rail made his decision. Reaching into his uniform, he withdrew the small data crystal containing the complete evidence package, the unedited files from Lazarin's data core, the surveillance footage of deliberate contamination, and the connections to the evolutionary directive. There is, Counselor, something that couldn't be trusted to normal channels, something that requires your direct attention and your discretion. As he handed her the crystal, Rail felt a curious sense of calm. Whatever happened next, he had chosen his path, not abandoning the principles of the Council, but fighting for their true expression. And in that fight, he had allies he would never have expected, from a species the Council had dismissed as too dangerous to include in galactic governance. Perhaps, he reflected, that had been the directive's greatest success, separating the Council from the very diversity of perspective that might have strengthened it against corruption. Perhaps humanity's emotional intensity, their willingness to take risks for what they believed right, was precisely what the Council had been missing all along. They called it a suicide mission, he murmured, almost to himself. Pardon, Lieutenant? Tehran asked, the data crystal now secured in her hand. A human expression. Counselor. Rail explained with a small smile. Sometimes, the most dangerous paths are the only ones worth taking. 3 months later, aboard the newly commissioned Council research vessel, Cooperative Venture, Lieutenant Commander Rail Theorin stood at the observation deck, watching the activity around him with quiet satisfaction. The ship represented something unprecedented in recent Council history, a joint Human Council initiative focused on Veltrax containment and research. The investigation sparked by the evidence he had provided to Counselor Tehran was still ongoing, carefully managed to avoid alerting directive sympathizers. But already, significant changes had begun. Security protocols had been enhanced, research oversight had been tightened, and most importantly, dialogue had been reopened with humanity and other species who had distanced themselves from Council governance. Admiring your handiwork? Asked a familiar voice. Rail turned to find Captain Amara Voss approaching, now walking with only the faintest hint of a limp, a remarkable recovery from her Veltrax encounter. Her presence aboard a Council vessel would have been unthinkable just months ago. Our handiwork, he corrected. None of this would have been possible without your intervention, or your courage in using the evidence we provided. she countered. Most council officials would have buried it to protect the institution. I wasn't protecting the institution, Rael said thoughtfully. I was protecting what it stands for, what it's supposed to be. Through the viewport, they could see various ships docking with the research platform that would serve as their base of operations, vessels from a dozen different species, some council-affiliated, others independent, all united by a common purpose that transcended political boundaries. The directive hasn't been eliminated, Voss noted soberly. They've gone deeper underground, but they're still out there, still pursuing their agenda. I know, Rael acknowledged, but they no longer operate unopposed, and the Council is stronger for having recognized the threat, both from Veltrax and from within. A notification chimed on the ship's communication system. Commander Theorin, Captain Voss, came the voice of the vessel's Vordak helmsman. Admiral Rivera's ship has arrived. They're requesting permission to dock. Granted, Rael responded, feeling a surge of anticipation. The arrival of the Earth Defense Force vessel marked another milestone, the first official recognition of human military capability by the Council in over 70 years. Ready for the next phase? Voss asked as they turned to head toward the docking bay. Rael considered the question. The path ahead remained uncertain, filled with political challenges and the ever-present threat of Veltrax's expansion. The directive would continue its work from the shadows. Old prejudices and suspicions would not disappear overnight. Yet, as he walked alongside this human who had risked everything to save lives the Council had written off, through corridors where species once divided by politics now worked together toward a common goal, he felt something he had not expected to find in the aftermath of such darkness. Hope. Ready, he confirmed. After all, some missions are worth the risk. As they reached the docking bay, the massive doors slid open to reveal the Earth vessel beyond, not the battle-scarred Tempest's Grin or the sleek Horizon's Edge, but a new class of ship bearing insignia of both human and Council design. A symbol of what could be achieved when courage and conviction transcended the boundaries of species and politics. They had called it a suicide mission until humans arrived to rescue it. Not just the scientists trapped on a doomed station, but perhaps the very ideals that had brought the galaxy together in the first place. And in that rescue, Rael reflected, lay the promise of a different future, one where diversity of thought and approach became strength rather than division, where the emotional intensity humans had been condemned for became the very quality that saved what rational calculation alone could not. It was, he decided, a future worth fighting for, no matter the risk, no matter the cost. Because sometimes, the most dangerous paths led to the most necessary destinations. And sometimes, the outcasts turned out to be the saviors no one knew they needed.